Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Gonna be getting back to work on the MR2 in this video. Last video left on this car, left off, had a little bit of a fail with trying to get the oil gauges working as far as the pressure and temperature gauges that I'm trying to install. So at the end of the video, I ordered some more parts and gave up and started putting the front bumper on. As you can see, I finished up getting all of the parts up top. It's all bolted in, and I got the turn signals and side moldings and whatnot on. Still have to put fog lights in, but I'm going to do some work to clean up the housings that I currently have. And then I also did not install the fender liners or the under trays because the ones I have are pretty banged up and broken. So I ordered new ones from MR2 Heaven. It's the first 4 pieces basically. So it's the 2 that go under the radiator and then the 2 front fender liners. So those should be coming in the next few days. So I'll have those nice new pieces to install because mine are pretty beat up. So once those get here, I'll go ahead and get those installed. And then I'm also waiting on the couple of pieces and parts for the gauges. I have a new plan of attack for those. I've got a adapter fitting that's made for a GT86 coming, and then I also am going to do a remote mount for the pressure sending unit because it's kind of heavy, and I think everything hanging off of that one adapter, it's just asking to break the adapter. So I'd rather have that remote mounted with just a braided line connecting the two. So once those come in, I'm going to get to work on getting that installed as well. All right, so it's been a couple days, and I just got these in the mail. What you see here is there is the actual brass block that I'd ordered, which is actually a little more substantial. It's a little heavier than I thought it was going to be. It's definitely got some heft to it, but this has got the right fitting to screw into the block, and then it has a couple of 1/8 as well as one for the factory switch for the oil pressure gauge. So this should have everything I need to cover all of the sending units / switches that I need to make everything work. So this should work. I'm pretty happy about that. Especially based on looking at the space that we have. This will just go straight into the hole in the block, and then I should be able to hook things up to it and be able to clear the belt perfectly. So now the other thing I did is I thought about it, and based on the weight of this and the pressure sending unit's pretty hefty. That's going to be a lot on just this little fitting here in an aluminum block. And I was worried about fatigue and failure. Last thing I want to do is strip out the passage in the block. So I think this is going to be heavy enough to throw in there. So what I did is got a remote mount for the oil pressure sending unit. So this has got, I think it's 3 feet of braided line. The 2 fittings, one is a male, one's a female, both 1/8 MPT. It came with this clamp, but this is actually going to be too small for the auto meter oil pressure sending unit. So I did get a pack of these. These are 1.5 inch cushion clamps, which these should fit that pressure sending unit. So I'll be able to just clamp it and mount it either on the firewall or somewhere on the engine. I'll most likely just mount it on the firewall, being that I have that much length of hose or of braided stainless line. So, but yeah, I mean, this is made for oil or fuel lines. Or sending units. So should be good there. So I should now have everything I need for take 3 on trying to get my gauges to work. So next thing I'm going to do is get the old switch out and start getting things put together and installed, and hopefully we can get this set up to work. All right, so while that is out and draining, I grabbed the adapter and then was just checking thread pitches. So it comes with one of the holes on the side plugged, as you can see there, and then the other one's open, and then there's the one in the back. So the one in the back is one of the 1/8 NPTs, and then I checked this one on the side here that's closest to the male, and that one, the NPT didn't fit in it, and that is made for the sending unit. That's the BPST. So this one with the plug should be the other NPT, which I'll use for the gauge pressure sending unit. So, and then the one on the end, I need to use that for the temperature just because of the length. That probe's pretty long, so it needs to have a deep fitting to go into. So I'm going to go ahead. First thing I'll do is get the adapter or this fitting installed into the block, and then I can start installing the individual sensors and sending units. like I said, I'm going to install the fitting for the braided hose into this one since I'm remote mounting the pressure sensor. So I'm going to get to work on that. I'm going to use Teflon tape on all the threads just to make sure they're good and sealed, and hopefully we can get this thing working out. All right, making progress. You can see I have the original switch in, hooked up. I have the sending unit for the pressure sensor with the remote line bolted onto it, and then the temperature sensor in the end. So I just need to get the adapter put onto the actual sending unit, and then I can hook it up to the line and wire a few things up, and we can test the gauge, make sure it works. All right, and just like that, line is hooked up. All the adapters and whatnot are in place and tightened up. So I'm gonna go grab the pressure gauge with my wiring, get it hooked up, and see if we can get this thing fired up and check for leaks. All right, well, you can hear it's running. You can see the gauge is giving me pressure. That's a positive sign for now. I'm gonna let it run for a while, see if we have any leaks or anything. It's only been running for about a minute so far. I don't see anything. That's good as well. But I'm gonna give it some time and make sure that nothing is leaking. So I'll check back in shortly. All right, been running probably about 5 minutes now. Pressure on the gauge, no signs of leaking at this point. Everything is looking good. So that is awesome news. I am going to go ahead and swap gauges and hook the connectors up to the temperature gauge and make sure that's working next. Alright, got the temperature gauge hooked up now. All leads where they're supposed to be. And looking at the gauge, it is slowly starting to gain temperature. When I first hooked it up, it was below the slash for the 100. Now it's finally starting to move ever so slightly, but hasn't moved much, but it's probably gonna take a little while to get temperature in the oil. But yeah, so it looks like the sending units are gonna work, gauges are gonna work. So far, like I said, no signs of leaking, which is awesome. Finally got this done, I think. Third time is a charm. So I think next steps are going to be to go ahead and start wiring stuff in the interior, get the gauges mounted in the pod that I have that goes on the steering surround, and then we'll do one final check once everything's installed and make sure it still all works, and then we should be good to go. All right, so it is the next day. Double checked, no signs of leakage in any of the joints, so we are good as far as the pressure sending unit goes. So what I did is I need to find a place to mount this thing. So I did loop the hose up this way, and you can see it sitting here. So I'm probably gonna anchor it to one of the valve cover bolts or something like that, just trying to decide lengthwise where I want it to go. And then I'm just gonna use 1.5 inch cushion clamp on it. And then as far as the stainless line goes, what I'll probably do is put together basically a clamp between 2 cushion clamps, bolt them together to tie it basically to the one AC line, just to keep it from rubbing on any of the rubber or the metal right there as far as the chassis goes. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. So I'm going to try and get this thing mounted up so we can call that done and then start wiring the gauges. All right, and this is where I mounted it. I used the bolt for the wiring harness clamp and just used one of the cushion clamps, so it is on there pretty good. So like I said, down below I'll put together a couple cushion clamps and a nut and bolt, and make a clamp mechanism, 2 different sizes, one on each end, to clamp the hose, the braided line to the AC line, just to keep it off the belt and keep it off the body there. And most of this is going to be covered by the side blade that fits right across here anyway, so you're really not going to notice this this line or anything like that. So pretty happy with that. So next thing on the list is going to be to get on the inside, start running a couple wires for the sending units. I do have most of the wires already in place to power the gauges from the old gauge setup that I had. So that'll be a little bit easier to integrate everything that way. But yeah, getting this thing all wired is next on the list. All right, and real quick, I just finished getting some of the trim bezel back in the interior. So the upper piece as well as that surround are all in place. So yeah, next we'll be getting the steering gauge cluster and getting the wiring done. to get these gauges up and running. All right, so this is the gauge pod I'm going to be reusing. It's basically the MR2 Heaven column surround, the thicker surround. I got that previously, and then I forget who makes this pod, but it's available online. I had it installed before with 2 prior gauges, so everything's already cut and drilled and mounted and whatnot. So what I'm going to do is install the 2 gauges. I have to create the harness for it. I have this some of these plugs. They're 5-wire plugs, which will be perfect because for the gauges, I'm going to need a positive, a ground, a light on, and then the bulb ground I'll just hook up to the same ground, and then the 2 sensors, one for the temp, one for the pressure. So this 5-wire plug will work perfect. So what I'm going to do is start making a harness up to get the one end mounted to the actual surround with the gauges installed, and then I can wire up everything in the car. I do have to run the 2 wires for the sensors. I have a positive and a ground already, but I will need to run something. I'll probably just tie into the light trigger on the radio wiring harness for the lights for the gauges, because my old gauges were digital and they didn't need a actual light trigger, so have to get that wire ran as well. So 3 wires to run into the chassis, not too bad, and then create the harness for the actual mounting pod. So I'm gonna get to work on that. All right, just a quick update. I have a wiring harness created for everything, power, black's ground, 1 blue that's got a terminal on the end is gonna be one of the sensors. The green with the terminal on the end is another sensor. And then there's 2 greens that have no terminal. Those are gonna be my powers for the lights, because you can see that doesn't have a terminal on it. And then for the ground on the light, I just basically put a terminal on it and screwed it onto the ground tab for the gauge. So it'll tie into the ground there, so the light should work and everything. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these mounted in the hood that I have here, get all the wiring plugged in accordingly, and I use the solder stick connectors, the melt wire connectors. I'm going to use those to connect the white to the greens that have no terminal, that are going to be the power for the lights. And then I'll write down, obviously, which each of these wires, because these are the colors I'm going to go by. I just used some scrap wire I had laying around for connecting this to the gauge, but these are the ones that I'm actually concerned with what the gauge colors or the wire colors are. So on the other end, that connector there, those would be the ones that I integrate into the chassis based on the colors. All right, time for just another quick update. I ended up having to change the connectors on the back to ring connectors and use the actual terminals, because when you had the ones that went on the posts or whatever you want to call them, it stuck out too far and the gauge would not fit in the cup based on the depth. I also had to take a pair of snips and cut the 2 threaded rods for using the factory gauge retainer, because they were too long. So I cut like 1/2 inch off of those. So now it will fit in there. It's loose, so I'm gonna have to put some electrical tape around the body of the gauge, and then I should be able to get it to stay in place inside of the gauge holder. All right, and here we are. Gauges are installed, wiring's all in place and whatnot. So next step will be to go ahead and get things wired on the chassis side as far as the adapter plug's gonna go, and we'll be all set and be able to get this installed. All right, so next on the list, I'm gonna feed the 2 sensor wires through the same hole that I have the fuel or the accelerator pedal cable going through. It's the one in the center of the firewall. So I'm gonna run those 2 down through there, try and keep them together, and then I can split them off, one for the temperature, one for the pressure sending unit, and get everything kind of tied together, taped together, and finalized to get plugged into the gauge. All right, under the car, just to kind of show you, I do have wiring hooked up to that sending unit, and you can see the wires hooked up to the pressure sending unit up top, and then I got kind of stuff snaked together. I also went through and tied a few things up so there's nothing rubbing on the belt, and just keep things in place. I did a little more tweaking to the bends of the AC lines, just because the one thicker line was a little bit close to the radiator, hose. I mean, you can see there's barely any clearance between the two, but it was actually pushing on it before. Now it's, you know, a little, if it's touching, it's ever so slightly, so it shouldn't be rubbing through or anything like that. So just wanted to clean that up. So I'm going to pull the wires through in the interior and start getting everything routed to get hooked up to the connector I'm using so I can get these gauges working. All right, update time, working in the interior. You can see that is where the two wires from the sending units come through. I got those routed and going through the dash there, coming out underneath. And I have the connector for the gauges all done. So you got the yellow and the blue, the signal wires. The gray, I have that jump to this white wire, which I tied into the fog light switch using this solder connector. There's an old crimp on here. I don't even know what that's from. I'll just tape it back up. That might have been an old gauge install or something. And then this is my horn button because I don't have a horn in this Momo that works. So I just have a push button that's on the dash when the lower panel's in. But anyway, so yeah, so I checked the wires. The second one in, the green from the left, the way I'm holding this, that one had 12 volts with parking lights and headlights on. The one that the crimp is on is only on when headlights are completely on. It doesn't work with parking lights, so I wanted the gauge light to work with parking lights as well. So tied into that and have that jumped over, and then obviously power and ground, black and red. So I'm gonna go ahead and go get the gauge hood and hook things up, and we'll test and see if the gauges work. All right, I got the connector hooked up, gauges, you can see them there. So let's turn the car to on, see if the needles move. Hey, we got needles working. So that works, we're getting the sending unit working, so obviously there's not gonna be any pressure and it's gonna be cold because the engine hasn't run. And let's check for lights. Parking lights, all right, parking lights work. And they stay on with the headlights and back off when you turn the lights off. So hey, I think we're gonna have working gauges. That is awesome. Yeah, I'm very happy. I think with that, let me turn this thing off so you don't have to hear the power steering pump. There we go. I think with that, I'm gonna call this video done because it has been a pretty long video as is. I know I need to get everything put back together, but there's a lot of cleaning and whatnot that I need to do as I start putting panels back in. Still need to get the accelerator cable put back, or the accelerator pedal mounted into place and whatnot, but I think that's gonna be the next video. So with that, I'm calling this a huge victory. Took 3 times, but I now have working oil pressure and oil temperature gauges hooked into my 2GR V6. That is awesome. If you learned something, if you like what you see, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching and have a great day.